thank you for your attendance today. You've received an updated agenda that covers the matters to be reviewed. Additionally, we have district representation present to discuss the spending plan as it relates to the recent federal stimulus awards to the school district. For those following our meeting, our agenda and our board book are posted to the main page of our website. We will also be considering 3 items recommended for approval by the Governance Committee. The privilege of the floor will be held at the conclusion of the meeting. Instructions for any individual who requests to speak on matters discussed today have been posted on the front page of our website. We ask the public to join us, and any concerns, we want to hear from you. So please go to the website and follow the rules on that website if you want to have a discussion with us today. I will ask Executive Director Robe to call the roll. Thanks.
You're welcome. Chair Olson is excused. Secretary Ploss.
Here.
Vice Chair Jurasek.
Present.
Director Sanfilippo.
Here.
Mayor Brown.
Present.
County Executive Polenkars.
Present.
We have a quorum. Secretary Ploss.
Thank you, Jeanette. Our first order of business is to approve the minutes from the Bfsa September 27th, 2021 board meeting. Directors will find those minutes and the accompanying resolution in your board book under tab 2. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
As moved.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Any discussion? Any corrections, changes? Hearing none, all those in favor of approving the minutes, vote aye.
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 Opposed?
Aye.
The motion carries and the minutes are approved. We'll now move to the BFSA items. The Governance Committee met earlier today and has recommended board approval of the 2022 board meeting schedule. The 2022-2023 Minority and Women-Owned Business Enterprise Goal Plan and the 2022-2023 Service Disabled Veteran Owned Business Development Goal Plan. The items were provided under tab 1 in your board book with the accompanying draft resolution under tab 3. I will bring each item separately for a vote. May I have a motion to adopt the regular meeting schedule calendar for the year 2022? Is there a motion?
I move.
Second?
Second.
Thank you. Is there any discussion on the calendar? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, the calendar passes. May I have a motion to approve the 2022-2023 Minority and Women-Owned Business Enterprise Goal Plan? Motion?
So moved.
Okay, second?
So moved.
Thank you. Any discussion on that plan? Jeanette, I just want to thank Nikita and your whole team for setting a good example in meeting our goals and exceeding our goals in this area. And I think it's important that if we're going to ask other covered organizations to meet these goals, that we meet them as well. So I'm happy that you reported in the meeting that we've met those goals. So thank you.
Thank you.
Is there any other discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Our goal plan for 2022-2023 has been approved. May I have a motion to approve the 2022-2023 Service Disabled Veteran Owned Business Development Goal Plan? Motion?
So
I'll move.
Second?
moved.
Thank you.
Seconded.
Is there any discussion of this plan? And again, I want to thank you for for meeting our goal, particularly under the difficult conditions with the pandemic. And while it's not a lot of money, I believe it's an important thing that we do. Any other discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 Okay, our goal plan for service disabled veteran-owned businesses is approved. We'll now move on to the school district. There are several matters before the BFSA staff, and they will report today, including the fiscal year-end audited financial statements and the first quarter review and analysis of the modified financial plan. We will begin with a review of the fiscal year 2021 audited financial statements to be provided by Nathan Miller. Nathan, can you give us that review? Nathan, you're muted.
Sorry about that. I was playing around. Can I just confirm that everyone can see my screen with the presentation? Very good. Okay. There we go. Okay, so we'll start the review with the Buffalo City School District's fiscal year end 2021 financial results. This first table here shows the final budget versus the year-end actuals. The final budget included a use of fund balance $53.7 million. Actual was a surplus of 46.7, and the budgetary variance was 100.4, and we'll break those down a little bit in a moment. So taking a look at the budgeted revenues, actual revenues were a little over 101% of budget, or $12.2 million greater than budget. Significantly, where these variances came from, the number one item there is the local sources, which is chiefly Erie County sales tax. Erie County sales tax revenues were $10.4 million greater than budget. There was some fluctuation within federal aid. This federal CARES revenue was unfavorable by 1.8, and that's due to timing. Those funds will be received in 21-22. And at the bottom there, operating transfers were favorable by 3.9 million. There was a reversal of 5.2 million to the special aid fund that related to the potential of a mid-year New York State aid decrease, which did not occur. Okay. Taking a look at the revenues here, this is just breaks it all out by the various categories, so you can see what the actual budget was, actual year-end results were, and how those numbers were arrived at. Actual expenditures were about 91% of budget. There were many variances. What we're looking at was a school year that was impacted heavily by the COVID pandemic. The school year started remote and was not fully in person until sometime in February of 2021. So there was a lot of variances with pupil transportation, with teacher instruction, a lot of the services that the district provides to district and non-district students, including programs for children with handicap conditions, English language learners, etc. There are $14.6 million variance in total employee benefits, and so on. And so it really that's the largest variance we've seen, and it was heavily impacted by the pandemic. And then this table just breaks out what the final budget number were for each of these expenditures, and then the actual expenditures at year end. Taking a look at the fund balance, comparing 2021 with the prior year, 1920, you can see that the total fund balance ended at $312.7 million, an increase of 46.7 over the prior fiscal year end of 266 million. And then we'll take a look at assigned fund balance in a second here. Assigned fund balance increased by 31 million over the prior year. Unassigned also is now $101 million. Assigned fund balance, three categories changed significantly here. The subsequent year's expenditures, which is the amount that the district bills in for a budget deficit. So the prior year had a $50 million budgeted deficit, which did not occur. This current fiscal year has a $29 million appropriation of fund balance in the adopted budget. So that was a $21 million change. The other big changes there are an increase of $20 million up to 69.1 million for Opeb. And then this new assigned fund balance for the American Rescue Plan continuation. This assigned fund balance did not exist prior to 2021. The district opted to assign $30 million for that purpose. And then finally, just to take a look at the historical Opeb numbers, see at the very end there that Opeb was 2.4855 billion at 6/30/21. And that's actually a decrease of about 128.4 from the prior year. The biggest difference there was expected and actual expenses of about half or 500 million. Okay, and that's my brief review of the fiscal year end results.
Are there any questions for Nathan?
Nathan, this is
Yes.
Jeanette. What is the line rescue plan continuation?
Okay, so the district included $30 million for this. This is a pot of money in assigned fund balance for continuing the programs that would be started with the American Rescue Plan funds, the ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 funding. So it's just set aside to continue what is created with those grant funds.
Right.
I'm not as familiar with the school ARP guidelines. What is the federal deadline for the expenditure on those?
The deadline for which, I'm sorry.
So for the feds, so for instance, for the ARP state and local relief fund, we have a December 31st, 2026 hard deadline. What was the school deadline? Do you know? Yeah, it's there are different deadlines for the two. The ESSER 2 is 2023 and ARPA is 2024. But later on in this meeting, district is planning on giving a big presentation on where ARPA stands in those plans as well.
Nathan, my question on the rescue plan continuation line. Are those dollars local dollars and New York State dollars, or are there federal dollars in there as well? If they can tease that all apart.
Now, this is just district funding that management opted to assign this category. It's district fund balance right now. So it's revenue or reserves that they have on hand.
All right.
Nathan?
But again, go on. I'll probably have more clarity as we go on. Thank you.
Is this a program they currently have where it says continuation, or is it a new program upcoming this year?
These are the programs have begun. It's fun. It's anything that the district is doing for their ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 funding. They'll, it's close to $290 million over 3 years. And so what the district did was include $30 million of assigned fund balance so that when that funding runs out, they have this money set aside if they choose to use it to continue some of those programs. But yes, they have begun this year. There's expenses that have been are already assigned for ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 funding.
Thank you.
Nathan, my question is, if looking at these audited statements, are we able, what would it have looked like if we hadn't had the rescue plan? I know there's basically three parts to this. What would it have looked like if we hadn't had the pandemic and therefore we had just continued on, you know, to be able to forecast what this would look like? Obviously, then there were expenses from the pandemic, some of those being covered, others being put obviously into the contingency. Do we know what this would have looked like in lieu of the money or in lieu of the pandemic? Would they have had to eat into their fund balance, or would they have been balanced and essentially has the federal money just sort of matched the extra costs? Do you know?
Yeah, so it would have looked radically different. The final budget had a $50 million deficit in it. On top of that, there was the threat from New York State that further New York State aid could be clawed back, so that 50 million could have expanded, you know, double, almost triple of that theoretically, which never occurred. And a large part of that was the federal stimulus money that came in December and then later on in April. This slide here shows just how different the impact of all that federal funding. It's $100 million swing from what was originally adopted.
So there would have been, I mean, there would have had to have been a gap plan put forward to cover the deficit, whether using fund balance or other gap closing measures. I guess what my concern is, and I just raise it here, is as we go forward and we go back to whatever the new normal is, how are we going to be able to forecast and look, you know, where we're going? Because this is such an outlying year. Are we as the control board going to put together a set of budgeted items that are adjusted to try to help forecast and help the school district in making our recommendations? Or, you know, is there a different plan? And maybe that's too high for your pay grade, but I'll ask you first.
I think I'll interject here then. So I think there's going to be a couple different ways that we're going to be looking at it, Secretary. As far as the employee compensation buckets go, we can look at those independently based on contract negotiations and how many employees they're budgeted. So we can kind of carve that part out. And then with the other buckets, especially transportation, I think that's where we're going to have the most difficulty. We're going to have to pull up pre-COVID numbers and apply some type of inflationary standard to those and extend it even further. I mean, on top of the fact that we're looking at, as you mentioned, just it's really 2 years that were outlier years that are reported on. Now we have unprecedented inflationary rates that we're looking at. So we've got some complicated financial models to be building here in our future evaluations on that.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that we all understand that we're going to have to go back to a different kind of model to try to figure out where we're going forward, whether we're making recommendations or whether the school district and the city are actually putting together, you know, their forecasted budgets. Jeff, I see your hand. What would you like to add?
Hi, good afternoon, Bfsa board members. I just to kind of clarify a little bit, that there are a lot of questions on the ARP continuation. So what the intent of that is, just to be clear, is that our ARP plan, the federal funding goes for 3 years. We're looking at a 5-year plan. So the intent is that we're going to use some of the indirect cost revenue that the general fund will generate, about 8% of the total grant. And we're going to set that aside to be able to continue certain programs in year 4 and year 5. So we don't have to end them. We don't know what programs those are yet because we haven't yet done all the evaluations. It really is in its infancy at this point. A couple other points to make too. The ARP plan, everything in our ARP plan it's separate and apart from the general fund. So the numbers that you all were looking at here, they don't include any funding from that at this point. The only federal funding that was in the prior year was the 29 million CARES Act, and that was an offset to a state aid reduction. Now we're expecting a full phase in. This is what's in legislation right now, a foundation aid, which is, I think that's somewhere in the tune of $80 to $100 million in increase in foundation aid over the next 3 years, provided the state continues with that. So that's largely where a lot of our, where the revenues in the next couple of years are going. But anything, when we're talking about anything in our federal programming, the general fund itself is really designed around recurring revenues and expenditures. The reason that we had such a big surplus really over the last 2 years is largely because of just spending being down. Revenues are higher in the current year we're in and in the future years based on these most current projections from the state. But largely it's a reduction in spending is what was driving a lot of those the surpluses. So I just wanted to kind of clarify those points a little bit.
Thank you. I think they do clarify that. So are you expecting the spending then, now that the pandemic is changing, to go back up to pre-pandemic levels or not? Are these permanent changes, you think, in costs, or are they temporary because of how we found ourselves?
It's really too early to tell at this point, and this is not just us, but this is nationwide. Staff positions, it's getting tougher to find people, so vacancies are a bit higher than they've historically been. You're probably all well aware of transportation issues in terms of getting bus drivers. So, we budget as though we're going to go back up to sort of the full pre-COVID spending. At this point, we're not there. Transportation, it may be a year or two until transportation gets back. So we don't really know, but we have to kind of within our budget plan for the possibility of all, basically everything kind of getting back to normal.
Yeah. I mean, let me thank you for doing the 5-year plan. I think that that's an important part of putting this all together. Is that part of the ARP where we've been able to move different things around to be able to do that been approved yet? Or is this just still in the planning stage?
The ARP, and actually I don't know when we're going to get to our presentation, because I know the superintendent has to drop off in about 20 minutes. And I didn't want him to have to drop off without being able to speak to you, but I do have a presentation that I can share that will really go over it. But essentially we've submitted a plan for both of the federal fundings to the state. One has been approved. The other, I believe, is very close to being approved. All of these plans, though, we have to take with a little bit of a grain of salt that we still have to implement, we still have to evaluate, we still have to know that things are changing rapidly. So there will be changes going forward. But again, our plan is designed really around a supplemental model. So everything is intended to be supplemental to what we do on a day-to-day basis in our general fund.
Okay. Yeah, why don't we move?
I have one.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I have one quick question regarding fund balance. What comprises that $30.8 million across the board restricted fund balance? What is that pretty much component? What are the components of that $30.8 million every year?
It's made up of a handful of things. There's a stabilization reserve. There's an unemployment reserve, and then there's a reserve for legal claims and property loss. those numbers have been relatively constant. I think we did increase our unemployment reserve 2 years ago.
Okay. Because I see that you got 9 million across the board for union contracts, and I didn't know then what the $30.8 million was comprised of. Thank you.
Okay, why don't we move on if there aren't any other questions?
Fred, I have a question for Jeff.
Okay.
Jeff, again, the continuation fund, I think you said that you may recall my question. Where did those dollars come from? Are they local or state or federal dollars? And you said, I think that that is a set aside from indirect costs grants as part of the rescue plan. Indirect costs, correct?
Yeah, the amount that we initially put in there, and this is planning 3-4 years out, was designed to match up relatively close with that indirect, with the indirect charge. Now, by its nature, anything in the general fund in fund balance it's local revenue. It's not attached to federal requirements. Once it's in the general fund, in our fund balance, it becomes a local revenue that we can utilize like other fund balance.
All right.
We're just really trying to kind of get ahead several years, knowing that some of these programs are going to be things that we really like doing and that are going to be successful, and we don't want them to have to expire in 3 years if that federal funding goes away.
Sure.
So we want to be able to kind of soften that and allow some time to hopefully bring those back into the general fund, but without the risk of a hard kind of cutoff and drop of that spending.
Sure. And just to correct my understanding, I thought there was, how should I put it, a hard drop dead stop of rescue plan spending at the end of the program, 3 years. But it appears that indirect costs, you're able to, how should I put it, save up and spend after the deadline. Is that right?
Yeah, the indirect cost will be an expense in the grant during the grant life term. So the ESSER 3 grant goes out through September of 2024. The district will be charging indirect cost at the state prescribed rate throughout the term of these grants ending in September 24. So that will happen in the fiscal year we're in now, and then the next 2 fiscal years.
Okay.
At the conclusion of that time, that revenue will have been recognized in the general fund.
Okay, got it.
And it's essentially tied in with what we put aside in the assigned fund balance.
Okay, I think I got it. And please just give me a very simple rule of thumb. The general fund is, again, this is for me as a rule of thumb. The general fund consists of what, 85% personnel costs, or is it even higher than that? Just give me a rule of thumb.
No, personnel costs, maybe if you take salaries and benefits, it might be about half. And then
only half.
Right. And then other large, debt service expenditures, charter school tuition, all of our contracts.
Okay, around half. Okay, thank you.
Vice Chair Jurczyk, I think Mr. Pritchard's going to give us a longer discussion a little bit later on. So if we can just move on, because I know Superintendent Cash has wanted to say a little bit too. But let's move on to the district's first quarter report, which is under tab 4. Nathan, can you review that item? And then, move on to the modified financial plan, if you will.
Absolutely. Okay, so the following is a review of the Buffalo City School District's first quarter financial results. I'll briefly go over some of the highlights to date. Following the budget's adoption, the Board of Education approved a budget amendment to increase the charter school tuition expenditure line by $8.8 million. Now, this was essentially a budget transfer. There was no change in the overall general fund budget of $972.5 million. And in the sub bullet points there, it shows where the funds were transferred from, the reserve for contingency, and then various employee compensation and benefit lines. All of this stemmed from this noted action here where the two charter schools had planned to be closed. New York State Supreme Court granted a preliminary injunction, so those two schools are currently operating as district chartered schools for the 21-22 school year. Back on September 8th, I have this as a bullet point because it's the district was fully in person to start the school year. And of course, the prior year, this was not the case. In-person instruction did not occur for everyone until about mid-February of 2021. October 20th, the Buffalo Board of Education reviewed and received their financial statements that we just reviewed. We reviewed the $104 million budget surplus in the general fund, the actual surplus of $46.7 million. Also, the food service fund here, you don't typically point that out, but 2021 concluded with pretty significant $16.4 million budgetary surplus and an actual surplus of $11.4 million. Also, since the start of the fiscal year, the Buffalo Board of Education has approved 6 labor contracts. The estimated current fiscal year general fund impact is about $6.7 million. 5 of these 6 are funded primarily through the general fund. The food service fund is funded exclusively through the food service fund. We touched about this a little earlier in the discussion, but there are some labor shortages in critical areas for the district. Transportation for bus drivers. These are not district employees, but it certainly does impact the district's ability to transport pupils. Bus aides. There's shortages in instruction. That the vacancy rate was 4%, or 152 full-time equivalent employees at September 30th, as compared to budget, and so on and so forth with the substitute teachers and as well as the teacher aides and assistants. And then also within the food service program, there was an estimated about 12.5% vacancy rate. A little difficult to factor that in, but that was the rough estimate of vacant positions within that program.
Could I ask a specific question, maybe to the school district, as it relates to the vacancy levels at substitute teachers? Where are we with like special needs teachers, like speech therapists or occupational therapists or whatever services in the school district? I mean, are they included in the substitute teacher percentage of vacancy rate?
Colleagues, short answer. And colleagues, I've got to go pretty soon. This is a board meeting day. We've got a lot of crazy stuff going on here in the district. My understanding was we were going to be first up with this ARP-ESSER, and then Jeff can answer most of these questions. But the bottom line on that doesn't correlate to substitute teachers. Substitute teachers is a whole nother population of employees. Our school psychologists, speech and language, all of those kinds of specialized teachers, we're in good shape with them.
I'm sorry, Superintendent.
Yeah, no, I will defer to your presentation.
Yeah, why don't we wait and take up those questions during Jeff's presentation? I'm sorry, Superintendent Cascia, I did not hear that you were only going to be here till 1:45. So I apologize for that. Why don't we move right on to your discussion if you have to go in a few minutes. So we would like to hear what you have to say. And you just went black, so you know. Superintendent Cash, are you there? Yeah. You're on mute, sir.
I'm with the general counsel. It's an urgent matter. I will be right there. Jeff, if you could start the presentation, then I'll come right in. Jeff Pritchard has an excellent 5-slide presentation for you colleagues. He'll start with that. I'll come right back as soon as I can.
Thank you. Jeff, you're up, I guess.
Okay, I'm going to try and share my screen here in a moment.
Okay.
Okay, can everybody see the front page of my presentation?
No. Nathan, can you allow him to share? I'm just wondering if he doesn't have permission at this point. So, Jeff, if you could try in a few seconds, I think.
Jeff, I made you a co-host. You should have the ability to share, but if that's not working, it should work now. If that doesn't, you can email it to me quickly and I'll put it up for everybody.
I have it ready too, Jeff, if you want me just to, don't you got
There
it?
it is.
There it goes. I think it's working.
I've tried to share. Okay.
There it goes. You're good, Jeff.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'll try to get through this as quick as I can. Hopefully, Dr. Cash can jump back in really quick as well. I've given probably at least a dozen or so presentations on the ARP-ESSER funding. So if you in addition to this presentation, I've got there's information posted on the finance, the district page and also the district finance page. So just at a high level, our ARP plan, it's $289.6 million. It encompasses 2 different grant funds that were created under separate federal legislation. That CRRSA, the ESSER 2, was an $89.2 million funding bucket that can be spent through September of 2023. Our plan, the actual plan that we developed, has been approved by the New York State Education Department. The ARP plan, ESSER 3, is $200.4 million, and that one has an additional year, so that goes through September of 2024. Both of these have very similar legislation and guidance in terms of what they can be spent on. Obviously, the size of them is different, and then the term is different. And the ARP plan does include some additional things like a 20% set aside for lost instruction time, which would be about 40 million of spending. And that includes anything from after school to summer school to any type of supplemental instruction. This plan, it's been submitted to the state. They've had some questions and clarifications. We believe we're very close to it being approved as well. What that'll mean is that the Education Department has approved both of these plans for us to execute on. We have posted the full plan, so the full grant is posted on the main district webpage. In the ARP funds, you can see the actual ARP plan, which is about 160 or 70 page document. And then both of these grants, one I think is about 100 pages, the other 200, or it might be 50 and 100. They're large documents, and all the details of all the spending that we have outlined at this point are in there. The state's made it very clear, and I'll make it clear to you as well, things will change in the coming years. There's going to be things that we're planning for now that aren't, that based on evaluation, we may just decide to change. There'll be new things that come up. So these plans are going to be living documents. Community involvement is one of the keys, especially to the ARP plan, but we really make community involvement part of the overall. So I'm going to go to the next slide here. And this little table here, I'm not going to spend a ton of time going through it. It's really something that you can look at, but in our ARP plan, and based on community feedback, we put everything into about 19 different sections of spending from the earliest learners through adult education and in college and career readiness. What we did is we got feedback from the public, And what I kind of show on here is the individual programs that were developed throughout the district in conjunction with community feedback. I actually lay out roughly, based on our initial request, what the number of items in the budget and the dollars that are in the budget in each of these categories. And then next to that, I put in the community, we put in the community feedback. And the next slide, I actually took sort of the quantities. So of each of those 19 different areas, I wanted to chart side by side the community feedback, the quantity of requests and comments that we received versus the number of budget items we put in to really see how they matched up. And I was heartened to see that for the most part, they correlated pretty well. Where a lot of community feedback was received, our plan recommendations were higher and so forth. Next and final slide before I turn it over to Dr. Cash. Again, just to summarize, and this was included in our first quarterly report, the 2 grants and then the years. So we're anticipating over 3 years, 124.7 million in this first year, 91.7 in the second, 73.2 million in the third year for 289.6 million. This again will probably change. As of the beginning of December, we've actually spent 16.8 million out of the 124.7. We've encumbered around 11.3 million. Together, that adds up to about 27 million. I think we're probably over 30 million today. That would be the biggest grant we've ever received. So we, in the first part of the year, have spent more in these grants combined than I think in any other single grant that we've ever had. So a lot of dollars were deployed towards summer programming, towards technology. Those are some of the things that we rolled out the quickest for our students. And there are still obviously a lot of dollars left to spend. And then next to that, I have a little pie chart that really lays out where the spending goes. And the bulk of it, more than half, is really directly related to instructional initiatives. Then when you look at the gray, that's information technology. So we're deploying a lot of technology resources. And then the yellow at this point, that's our student support and social emotional support. So any of the guidance, social workers, psychologists, and so forth. That light blue is that indirect. So that's about an 8% indirect charge from the general fund to the grant. And then the dark blue, COVID operations and facilities. So this includes things like PPE, cleaning equipment, additional resources for engineers, custodians, masks, things like that, along with some capital projects to improve air quality in our buildings. So that is in a nutshell where we are at with our ARP planning. We're developing right now, this is a major undertaking. We're developing sort of a monthly report that we're going to be sharing with our board. I don't have that to share today, but I should early in the new year. And that's how we're really going to monitor and project for the next 3 years in terms of this spending. So I'm going to turn it over to the superintendent to kind of follow up my presentation with any comments that he has.
So again, good afternoon, colleagues, and thank you for providing us. Jeff, could you leave that slide up? I think it's useful, at least for a bit. This opportunity to speak with you and share some of the what I consider to be high impact elements of this very exciting, very transformative plan that we have developed as a school district. Now, certainly as a school district, we have conducted a number of outreach and community-based meetings, but that's just a part of it. You want to hear from your constituents. However, we also look at all of the data associated with this work, where we have come to under this administration in particular, and where we still need to go. We look at how our children have fared and how they are emerging, coming out of a substantial period of time when they were doing remote learning, a necessity at the time, and now back into full 5-day-a-week in-person instruction, still very tentative with the nature of this shifting disease. I'm going to tell you, it's something I worry about every day. And so we're looking at our children. We're looking at their social, emotional, psychological, and mental health needs, of course, as well as their academic needs. And when we look at all of that, the great majority of the investment will be in this orange space and in the yellow space. The yellow pie and the orange pie together represent the highest impact directly to our students on a daily basis. Now, colleagues, there are probably, I don't know, over 5,000 individual line items that I have signed off on and reviewed with staff in order to execute this plan. This plan has been well received by the state, and the federal government to date has only had a very low number, a handful of clarifying questions that they wanted us to respond to. And so for all intents and purposes, both of these plans have been accepted by the federal government and by the state government. So that's exciting news, that's important, good news. But what I can tell you is that every area of the curriculum, math, English and language arts, in the elementary years and grades, social studies, science, the 4 core subjects, but then also arts and music and additional support services for our students with special needs, our English language learners. Every aspect of the operation, the curriculum investments, priority strategic investments have been enhanced and deepened. And then we've had additional comprehensive professional development of our teachers and our support staff in order to work even more effectively with our students, given the emerging needs. So that's a really big part of the expenditure. In high school, you see an expenditure and a strategic investment in more AP courses, more rigorous course selections for our students across the board, not just at City Honors. We're trying to actually grow those courses in our some of our schools that have only had 1 or 2 AP courses heretofore. So there's an across the board work with a group called EOS, and they're very helpful out of New York City to help us grow students into AP coursework and to be able to pass the AP exam. So just about every area of support that our kids need, social workers, guidance counselors, speech and language therapists, mental health supports, all of it is strategically invested in this plan. So we're excited about it. It takes time to ramp up and begin to get the lines all populated and ready to go. And that's in this meeting today, we'll start to see a good tracking of some additional expenditures relative to the ARP ESSER funds. So that's pretty much what I want to say. This education bargain, we call it the education bargain because that is our sort of concise strategic plan. And so class sizes in the early grades will be held to a low 18 to 22, 24. You'll see community schools continue to grow and be excellent examples in 30 communities across the district. You'll see new innovative high schools coming online in our gender-based academies, for example. You'll see continued services for our children, our neediest children and families, which is a great portion of our population. And then you'll see us continue to invest in our teachers and in our administrative teams at schools so that we have effective teachers and effective leaders, great teachers, great leaders at the school-based level. So all of that covers the ballpark on what we're doing. I have a very clear vision about all of this, as well as a track record of accomplishment to date. So we'll continue to expand and deepen that work under the education bargain. Certainly the IT expenditures are important and the COVID expenditures are important, but you can sort of infer what those are about and understand why those are expenditures in here as well. But if you have any specific questions about the gray and the blue, then certainly I'll answer those as well. All right, that's my concise report.
Thank you.
Let's hear what you.
I would just have a question, and whether it's you or Jeff can answer, is how are you and how does this plan relate to higher ed, both in the community colleges in the area and the other higher ed, UB, Buff State, the private sector colleges? I know, looking at the students that have come out of not just Buffalo, but everywhere, the difficulties the students have. And I will just tell you, Superintendent Cash, my real concern to date now with the students that I have is mental health. I can't tell you how important and how hard it has been for our students to transition to college at any level. But the mental health issues are really serious. I'm just wondering, how we're relating, if there's anything else I can do to try to help make those connections if those are needed. But it seems to me that that's an important area.
Yes, excellent, excellent. And thank you for that observation, Chairman Floss. I would concur with you. But not only for many of our students, we're seeing it in family members. We're seeing it among our staff. Quite frankly, that incident the other day of going over into the falls, that was one of our teachers. And that was someone who was intending to hurt herself. So we're seeing a lot more of that on a daily basis. And I don't want to recount all of it, but we're working closely with interagency organizations to help us address the issues, support the issue in terms of listening and giving the intervention support that the child needs, rather than if it were pre-COVID, some of the behaviors and some of the issues that you're right, they're related to trauma, they're related to all kinds of things that if they were bad pre-COVID, they got worse during COVID. And so we're seeing that. And so we're trying not to be punitive, we're trying to be restorative. And that's the approach that we're taking. But yeah, it's tough to see in our youngsters, and it's gonna take a while longer for all of us to climb out of it. A lot of our kids have lost family members, a lot of family members, And so when you have 2, 3, 4 family members that have passed away during this time for COVID-related reasons, then you get that going on as well. The grief associated with loss, the grief associated with hardship, financial, psychological, emotional, and we're investing in it, but it's going to take time, and it's going to take all of us working on this. So thank you.
Yeah, I hope you know that the faculty and staff of the higher ed institutions, with all of the expertise in these areas, is willing to come and work with you and help you however we can. So if you reach out and you don't get a positive response, please let me know, and I can reach out to maybe the right people to make sure that we can help you, because I know that this is going to be a real difficult situation.
We have 2 excellent pediatricians working with us, so that is good. But I think you're right. The curriculum around mental health and how to address some of those issues, if you specialize in any of that in higher ed, we'd certainly be interested in that research and possibly making contractual arrangements with you to help our teachers and staff understand the dynamics associated with that. So thank you.
No, I just wanted to make sure.
Dr. Cash, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. Yes, go ahead.
Dr. Cash, this is Andy Sanfilippo. First of all, let me congratulate you on your plan, and certainly it's pretty ambitious, and you and your staff deserve a lot of credit in trying to undertake a lot of which we were just discussing, and you discussed the past few minutes. The one question I have is actually I'm going to go in a different direction, not from the higher education standpoint, but I'm going back to charter schools. How do we, or how does the district determine or at least monitor whether or not the items that you've put in your plan that have been, approved by the state and so forth, trickle down into the same response level or successes in the chart for the Buffalo school kids who are currently in charter schools? Are they required to adopt your plan or the plan of the Buffalo Public Schools? And is there a way that, how do the charter schools account for the Buffalo school kids who are in those programs? And what can be done about it if we don't know whether or not they are achieving the same goals that you are?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that's a great question, fair question. I always looked at Buffalo as A plus B equal Buffalo children, Buffalo public school children. So we have about 31,000 Buffalo public school students currently, and then another 9,500, maybe 10,000 at this point, charter school students. So when you put A plus B together, 40,000 students that we have to educate well. Now, those two schools that were alluded to in the earlier presentation by Nathan, we watch those schools and directly monitor and have conversations with those two schools because they're on a watch list. The other schools have their own independent kind of boards and their own independent plans. And I believe, Jeff, they get some money separate from what the Buffalo Public Schools gets. But that—
Do they have the same reporting requirements to the state and federal government that you guys have?
Yeah, that's the question I was going to say, Jeff. I'm not sure what their reporting requirements are. Do you know?
Yeah, charter schools. So charter schools receive Title I, like in their own name and to them directly. Similarly, any of the American Rescue Act, these funds, they would also have received their own funds, and they'd be subject to, like any other school or any other school district, they're subject to the same kind of planning requirements and so forth. They don't have to do what we do because they have their own decision-making bodies, so they can choose they can choose to use those funds as they wish.
But what I would add—
so in other words,
yeah.
Go ahead, Dr.
What I would add, Mr. Sanfilippo, is this is a time, if ever, because ever since I've been here, I've tried to create a partnership where we dialogue as a public schools and charter schools, to talk about shared challenges, shared opportunities, share PD. We have some best-in-class professional development, for example, for some of our students, and around multicultural and responsive, multilingual professional development that we could invite charter schools to. It's just been difficult to get everybody on the table, but this is the time, I think, more than any, that we should look at and cross-work and reference our work on behalf of all the children, because children still do go like this. There's a lot of this that goes on. Our kids going to charters coming back into the publics. And I think we should try to create as much alignment as possible around some core issues. They don't have to be exact because every school has student population with little different needs. But I definitely think those conversations should be encouraged. And I appreciate the question.
Did they ever consult with you guys or your staff when you were putting together your plan as to what your priorities were, or did they just develop their own plan independently of any sort of guidance from you?
I think we're not technically with those two schools. I believe we've had some conversations because I've got leads working with Enterprise and Westminster, leads offered by executive staff. But the rest of the charter schools, some 20 or so, no, that has not occurred.
Okay, thank you.
Chair Jurczak?
Yes, Superintendent, I'm going to use a general number from Jeff's presentation. So across 3 years of rescue funding, there's around 290 million of rescue dollars. And in the pie chart on committing, spending those dollars, 54% of those dollars is committed to Jeff's word and your word, expanded and enhanced delivery, instruction, and support. Now, we know from other data that you're trying to, that your team has tried to set aside a continuation fund, continuation dollars, but the continuation dollars, 30 million, is that what you, at least at this moment, will have available? Oh my goodness. Does that mean we can't rescue all of the rescue plan funded programs? Now I'm giving you a magic wand on in responding. Yes, these are enhancements and expansions to what you already do. How are we going to make sure that we don't lose them?
Well, I think it's a good question at the surface. I think one of the assumptions was that at some point there would be an endemic stage to the pandemic and that things would go back to normal. There's this sort of simplistic view of this virus. And so with that kind of underlying assumption about it, if you could front end and turbo boost the supports and the instructional enzymes for our kids to catch them back up and help them accelerate their learning and then go ahead, heal, progress, thrive, then that would be enough. 3 years would be enough. Again, I don't know, I'm an educational expert, but I don't know what the policy experts were that came up like that. So not everyone is going to use the money as strategically and as transformative as we are, see, because we already had a good plan. And so now we're going to be able to even enrich and turbo boost that plan. Sad as it is, many districts who were underfunded before are using their funds to close budget gaps, you see, and do other kinds of things. You can be rest assured, at least as long as I'm here, that these monies will be spent to continue to lift and develop our children psychosocially and emotionally, as well as academically. And the plan speaks for itself. It's a tedious plan, it's a deep plan, but it shows that if you take that. So we'll continue that by every year looking at the ones that are the highest impact, the most promise, the kinds of positions that are making the difference. And then what so many districts don't do, Vice Chairwoman, we will sunset some of the things that aren't showing that kind of bang, because not everything has to be continued if kids are making a good adjustment back on and moving ahead. And so that's what our aim is. That's our philosophy, and what we call our strategic action, our theory of action. You know what a theory of action is. We've been very explicit about that, and we are going to follow that. And so that's my hope. I don't think it will need to be 280 million on top of a good O&M budget for 10 years, for example. We're going to front load this in year 1, then year 2 will be similar to year 3, and then year 4 and 5 will be able to probably make some even pushovers. We'll ask for grant modifications, and we'll have a nice, healthy amount to continue for those students who need additional support in years 4 and 5. So it's basically a 5-year plan. And I think in these days and times, 5 years is about all you can predict in anything.
Sure.
You know? Yeah,
So we'll keep the best and refine the best and fund the best.
there you go.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Jurczak. If you have one more minute, Superintendent Cash, I know you have to go. And I'm going to just sort of step backward. This is sort of going to be a little bit backwards. I was hoping to make these comments after we talked about the modified financial plan with Jeff Pritchard. First, I hope you believe, and we have tried very hard to work with the school district, and we think we take our responsibilities seriously under the BFSA Act. And, I want to make sure that we're working, and in the last few meetings that we've had with the school district, I think we're moving in a positive direction. Although I think we have one issue that I think needs to be addressed. And I just want to make sure that I'm saying while you're here, as opposed to you hearing it after the fact in going through that. And I think that the real issue is that the modified financial plan, which is required by the BFSA this past June, after we reviewed the first labor contract and found that the financial plan was no longer consistent with the expected district expenditures. Superintendent Cash, you requested an extension to provide a modified plan until the end of November, which we accommodated, and I think it was appropriate. And nothing among the other things that they would have handled, I think, on the federal stimulus dollars were available. All of these issues, I think, were important for you to ask for that extension, and I think it was appropriate for us to give you that. And the district also pointed out at that time that there was an expectation that more labor agreements would be settled, and as noted, 5 labor agreements were subsequently ratified by the Buffalo Board of Education. The 22-25 modified financial plan includes costs associated with the labor contracts that we have not reviewed, which is the Substitute United for Buffalo representing the substitute teachers. We furthermore won't be able to review that because it was previously ratified by the Board of Education on November 17th. We look at this as a serious deficiency in our obligation to be able to give you a recommendation before the school board ratifies these contracts, and that we're, again, willing to meet on an expedited basis to be able to do that, and that didn't happen. And prior to the Board of Education acting on these items, a letter was sent to you for the approval, and let me quote the letter, the approval of the contract without the opportunity to review and consider BFSA's comments circumvent the intent of the state legislation requiring the independent oversight of labor contracts, end quote. I emphatically agree with that statement. The review of labor contracts is integral to the financial oversight process to be conducted by BFSA. And I would hope that as we move forward, that we can come to an agreement that these need to happen. And if there needs to be additional information, we're willing to work with you to find an appropriate timeline for you to do that. The second item I wanted to address is the superintendent's proposed salary increases for cabinet level and exempt employees. The annual costs for the salary increases are approximately $600,000, excluding increases to fringe benefits and other Opeb costs. The modified financial plan does not provide for increased salaries for this group of employees. I'm concerned that the district continues to reach agreements without a complete financial analysis being conducted as to how these increased labor costs will be paid for in the future. These costs extend much further than the 4-year window that we're required to look at. The multi-year financial plan process represents the core of BFSA's financial oversight. To supplement that process, BFSA is required by the Act to review labor contracts and to be entered into this discussion. As a result, the BFSA draft board resolution, which we're going to talk about today, includes a provision that if the Board of Education approves the salary increases for the exempt employees, the district is to submit a funding plan and/or modified plan within 10 days of approval. Second, I would like to direct the executive director to submit a letter to the superintendent requesting the district to provide a written understanding and/or a position as it relates to the BFSA Act and why it believes it doesn't have to apply to the district as it relates to any of the other labor contracts that are under the BFSA Act. I wanted to make sure that you heard that from me. I didn't want it to be said after you left. I would have liked to say it after the thing. And again, it is our real concern that we need to be following the BFSA Act, and we take our responsibilities very seriously. So I hope you take this in the way that it's being presented, is that our view is that we need to have this done as part of our responsibilities.
Sure. All right, let me give 2 quick responses. I have to go. On the substitute piece, I thought that you couldn't get a meeting together. That was my understanding. And I needed substitutes. I looked carefully at it, and we are short substitutes. It's a major problem running classrooms during COVID. And I thought you couldn't get together at a moment's notice to review it in advance of the November meeting. That was my understanding. So it's not an intent by this district to just do contracts without the BFSA. So there's that one case. This case about the exempt salaries and the cabinet level salaries is really meant to be brought up and to have a conversation that may take a month, 2 months. So my intent is that you will have time now to look at that and weigh in on it. I have lots to say about it in a market that is difficult to attract and retain top level people. This is not an effort to try to rush something through the board. I'm not likely to see the board approve these tonight, but I do believe they will keep it fluid. I want them to keep the conversation fluid. I want them to be aware of the fact that if I lose one of these people, it puts us in a deep hole. And I've got about 3 people that if we don't do something to reimagine the salary structure, I'm going to lose these people. And this is people who are the engine that make this whole thing work. So take the time that you need now to review my proposal. Jeff and I will send over additional factual information. We're at the bottom of the big 5 in this regard. This is 33 people in this group, 33. And we are the largest district in the big 5. So that can't persist, that you just keep undervaluing the people who are the most educated and arguably the highest performing individuals as a group in the district. And they work under my direction and my guidance and my mentorship on a daily basis. So this is the time to do that. And we will continue the discussion, but I want you to look at that substitute thing as some kind of one-off. And we don't intend to do that again. We take the BFSA law very seriously as well. You have to have oversight and management, particularly when you actually have more funds than when you have very scant funds. So we appreciate your role.
And we understand the difficulties, particularly with the pandemic. And thank you for your comments. And obviously, I will have the executive director, work with Jeff and you to make sure that we get everything together and make sure the school district and the students get, what they need. Because in the end, we're here for the students and the families you serve and all of the families in the city of Buffalo. So I appreciate your comments. I'm sorry that you can't stay for the rest of the discussion.
Yeah, I'm already
really
backed up. All these
have
people.
found it enjoyable, but as we all do. But I appreciate you coming today, and I want to thank you for that. All right. Okay. If we can move back to, are there any other statements or anything anyone wants to make at this point? Or should we move back to, I'm trying to figure out where we are.
Jeff's presentation.
Okay, so I believe that right now that we are going to be looking at the modified financial plan. Am I in the right place, Jeanette? Either Jeanette will do.
Nathan, I will bounce to you. Were you done with your quarterly conversation, or did we have to pick up somewhere on that?
There were a few more comments, but
Okay.
It's up to
Well,
the
then
director.
Nathan, if you just continue, that would be great. Thank you.
You're good. So I think we can start just taking a look at the current fiscal year revenues and how they compare to the adopted budget. This slide here shows fiscal year end 2021 actuals and compares them with the adopted budget and then what is currently forecast for fiscal year end. Right now, the district is showing a $500,000 favorable budgetary variance at fiscal year end. We have this little side note at the bottom that our own independent Erie County sales tax receipt analysis thinks that it'll be a little bit more significant. And the number that we came up with internally here is $55.1 million. Next slide shows expenditures the same way with prior fiscal year actuals, the adopted budget. I have it broken out by adopted and modified because there were some changes from the contracts and from the budget transfer that was approved by the Board of Ed. Overall, there's a $19.5 million favorable budgetary variance forecast for fiscal year end. And as you can see, under transportation expenditures are significantly less than budget right now. These numbers do exclude all of the carryover encumbrances for the prior fiscal year.
Nathan, going back to the transportation, if I can ask just a quick question, and maybe it's Jeff that needs to answer it, are we looking at the second half of that year of transportation being more expensive given the discussions we've talked about today with having it being hard to find bus drivers and transportation? And do they believe the rest of the fiscal year and maybe summer school is going to be an issue?
Yeah, I can defer that to Jeff if he wants to give an update there.
So the projection that you see in after the first quarter is based on, so I meet with our director of transportation, and based on where we are at that point in time, it's the projection for the remainder of the year. So as you're aware, we had to reduce the number of bus routes because there weren't drivers to fill them all. That, when projected out through the rest of the year, reaches that $15 million difference there. Similarly, our bus aids are expected to be less than planned. We do it, I usually basically do it in conjunction with the quarters. So, and, at this point, I'm not sure if we've changed. I think if anything, we've probably consolidated a few more bus routes. So it's quite possible that we may find that that gap grows even a little bit bigger because we may be consolidating some bus routes. But at the same time, we may also find that, because we're working hard with our provider to try and recruit more bus drivers. So, in early January, I'm going to get together with transportation, find out where we are, and then we will have had one half of the year complete and a projection for the remainder of the year. So That's kind of our best guess for the full year at the time that we made it.
Right. So you're saying this is a point estimate and you didn't
Yes.
adjust it from that. Okay, that's all I wanted to know. Thank you.
I have a question. Nathan, would you go back one slide that shows, there it is. Jeff and Nathan, the fiscal year 18-19 was the last year, was the most recent year that was not inflected by COVID, if I'm right. And the state aid, which shows 2021, was I right? 18-19? Yes, that's right. That would be the. Am I right? 18-19 was the last. Okay, not inflected by COVID, and so. Looking at New York State aid during the dark early months of COVID, New York State backed down its, because the money wasn't there, its aid level to 619. And now, and then it comes back in the adopted budget to 692 and then 684. It stabilizes. So, which 692 and 684 is closer to pre-COVID state aid, correct?
Yeah, what you're seeing in that 2021 actual, it correlates directly with that federal stimulus. There was a New York State pandemic adjustment of $29 million that was backfilled by the same amount in federal aid. And so, yeah, that New York State aid less building aid was an atypically low number because of the pandemic adjustment.
Okay, and so when we look at your multi-year financial plan, I'm predicting that it's going to hover at around 690. We're assuming we have no other indicator otherwise. New York State aid will be where it had been.
It'll be quite a bit more over the next few years. New York State Foundation aid, Jeff mentioned this earlier, that the state has pledged to fully fund foundation aid in 3 fiscal years. So that the New York State aid number will increase quite a bit, and I'll be able to show the actual numbers when we get to the revised financial plan.
Okay, thank you. I'll wait. Thank you.
Yeah,
I think I have the picture I need. Thank you.
absolutely. So we can get to the summary. Most of this has been discussed, so I really think the final slide here, just with the 2 dates that we do have the modified financial plan. It was submitted to Bfsa on November 23rd. That's up next in the presentation. And then this final point here that about the cyber attack, which disrupted district operations, occurred back in mid-March of 2021. The sub point here is that the district incurred about $9.4 million in cost to restore system operability, to investigate and install necessary safeguards to minimize future exposures. That's really the end of the first quarter result analysis.
Sorry, are there any other questions for Nathan? Okay, the next item to review is the proposed modified 2022-2025 financial plan for the district. A copy of the BFSA staff report is provided under tab 2, along with the district's submission. A copy of the draft resolution related to our review was emailed to you separately. Jeanette, would you like to start the review for us?
I will ask Nathan to review it first, and then I've got a couple summary comments at the end.
Thank you then.
Okay, well, the following is the review of the modified financial plan for your 2022-2025 plan. Just to give the background information, in April, the Board of Ed adopted the adopted financial plan, the existing one. Then, of course, they adopted their budget in May. Then June through November, there was a series of 6 labor agreements that were approved by the Board of Education, which impacted the budget and the financial plan. And so the BFSA board back on June 19th, the board required the submission of a modified plan to solidify the funding plan for the first contract, which was BEST, the teacher aide teaching assistants. And then subsequently, when the additional labor contracts were approved, those were added into the request for to be included within the modified plan. Back in August, BFSA reviewed and approved the superintendent's request to extend the deadline up to November 30th. And then on the 23rd, the BFSA received the document from the district. This point here, December 15th, this evening, the Board of Ed is scheduled to review and consider approving the modified financial plan. So this slide here takes a look at, it's just a summary of the 4-year revenues in the modified plan, the 4-year expenditures, and the revised surplus or deficit. The original financial plan included a $29 million appropriation of fund balance in the current fiscal year, and then surpluses in year 1, 2, and out year 1, 2, and 3. The modified financial plan uses less overall fund balance. The current projection is $9 million for 21-22, and then as you can see, 5.8 would be required in year 1, out year 1, 5.4 in out year 3, and then out year 2, fiscal year 23-24 actually has a pretty substantial surplus currently projected. So the thumbnail of the modified plan, the 21-22 budgetary transfers which occurred are sufficient to address the current fiscal year net impact of these 6 labor contracts. The revised employee compensation and benefit expenditures, it includes the necessary transfers to fully fund in all 4 years for the 6 labor contracts. The revised revenue and expenditure projections are based on the most up-to-date data, particularly within the current fiscal year and the next fiscal year. So there were some adjustments in revenue projections, particularly within New York State aid, based on the current enrollment and the current and the needs for services there. Okay.
Nathan, can I ask you a quick question on those numbers? Do those include the estimates for the increased state funding that's being proposed, or is that just a forecast using baseline numbers without the fully funding from the court decisions?
Years 1, 2, and 3 include the fully funding of the New York State Foundation aid. Year 4 there is based on more of a increase in, it's actually a reduction in overall revenues, and that's unrelated to foundation aid. It's a reduction in New York State building aid primarily, but yes, by year 3, this plan reflects a fully funding of New York State Foundation aid. I would expect year 4 in the upcoming plan, the 24-25 would probably look different because of the state's further commitment toward increasing foundation aid. So short answer, I believe so, yes.
Thank you.
Just real quickly here, there are 3 contracts that are currently expired, 3 funded through the general fund. That's the teachers union, the administrative supervisors union, and also the local 409 engineers. And so this just gives a snapshot of when those contracts expired and the number of employees in the current budget. So the adopted financial plan and the revised plan had an estimate to settle the labor agreement. So we put this slide together just to show what was included in the original document. At that point, of course, those 6 contracts had not been settled yet. And so we lined them up and showed when they actually settled, what the dollar amounts estimated to settle them were. And then this is just meant as a comparison to just show those 2 amounts together in one spot. Okay. So taking a look at the revenues by themselves, I have a table here that shows how they looked in the original adopted financial plan versus the new modified plan. It includes the forecasts in the current fiscal year. You see that overall revenues combined don't change all that much, about $5 million. They're $5 million greater on a cumulative 4-year basis. So it's basically overall the same. Same thing with fund balance. There's the reduced use, and it's now spread out in year 2 and year 1, 2, and 4, not 3. Overall, the financial plan revenues are not different, as mentioned. There was some fluctuation. Oops, excuse me. General fund revenues under miscellaneous were increased by $6, $8, and $6 million. $20 million in years 1, 2, and 3. These are indirect cost revenues associated with ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 funds. And then I also mentioned that the state aid was moving around a little bit as well. 22, 25, New York State aid less building aid was reduced by these amounts, 7.8, 12.8, and then $100,000 in the final 2 years. This just reflects the current fiscal year state aid projections based on the enrollment and the 22, 23 projected reductions in New York State transportation aid. So because transportation expenditures are less than budget this year, New York State transportation aid will likely be reduced in the following year because it's largely reimbursed. Taking a look at the modified financial plan expenditures, this slide shows the adopted financial plan versus the modified plan. And then I have these 2 columns on the right here to show year 2 and 4 aggregated, as well as the entire plan aggregated. And then on the bottom there, the net costs for the 6 contracts. I should say the 5 contracts because all but one of them is funded. One contract was funded for the food service fund. So the impact here in the general fund is for the 5 contracts. It was $6.7 million in the current fiscal year, over 4 years, close to $30 million. And then finally at the bottom row takes out the amount that had previously been built into the financial plan, which there was some dollar amounts so that could be fleshed out when we went through the analysis to show that that the plan did include some budgeted amounts for these contracts. So it's reduced overall to $22.3 million over the 4 years. The staffing plan largely did not change in the financial plan. This slide shows just the current year and then the out years, teachers versus all other employees. That in the current year, teachers were reduced by 37 budgeted positions, and that was related to the removal of the charters for Westminster and Enterprise. The assumption was that those 2 chartered schools would close. Westminster would reopen as a district elementary school, and it had a school-based budget complete with budgeted staff, supplies, etc. Because that action did not occur in the current fiscal year, the staffing plan is changed to reflect that, and other minor changes as well. that completes my overview of the revised financial plan. I can hand it off to the executive director.
Thank you. So overall, we conclude that the district's proposed modified financial plan is reviewed today by Nathan, and thank you, Nathan, that was quite a lot to cover, is balanced. It incorporates the costs, as he mentioned, of the 5 labor agreements that our board, well, we've reviewed 4 of them, settled since this past June, and it revises other projections as appropriate based on the change in the enrollment and the drop in transportation expenditures, as Nathan mentioned, and the lag and when that aid will be recognized in the future. As noted by Nathan, this item is on the Buffalo Board of Education's meeting agenda for later today. So when you look at the draft resolution, it is provisional. Your review and your approval of modified plans provisional based on their approving it without any subsequent changes. Could you go to the next slide for me, Nathan? Thank you. So the impact on the district's modified 21-22 budget to reduce the temporary, it reduces the temporary budget gap from 29 million to 9 million. And I call it a temporary budget gap because it completely relates to the timing of when transportation revenues received and when those dollars are planned on being spent. So we did not consider the budget gap in this year's budget to be an operational imbalance, but to reflect pure timing differences. Next slide, please, Nathan. Thank you. So looking to the 3 out years of the financial plan, excuse me, the impact of the recent labor agreements, you can see those particularly in years 2 and 4. You don't see it consistently because there's other things going on in year 3, but there are operating deficits projected for year 2 and 3. They're able to fund those. Importantly, on a cumulative basis over the 4 years of the plan essentially balances with about a $400,000 budget gap, which when you're looking at those total budget amounts, you know, in totality, that's a very small amount. But the pressure on the budgets, it's clear when you look at that year 2 and that year 4. Now, more importantly, is the district is out of contract with 2 of its largest unions, the teachers and the administrators. There's a contract with engineers, local 409, that's outstanding as well, but that's an outlier. They've got different nuances to that contract. So really, this board should really focus on the 2 largest unions. Now, presumably settling these contracts will increase employee compensation costs and associated fringe benefits substantially, and would likely require the use of fund balance under the structure of this financial plan, which is, of course, a non-recurring funding source. The impact on current and future years from the negotiation of labor and employment contracts should be fully evaluated and considered during the negotiation process, and the approval process itself by particularly the Board of Education should include a thorough review of this financial evaluation. And that summarizes our advisory comments on review of the modified plan, but overall we're comfortable that it's balanced and it complies with the provisions of the act.
Okay, thank you, Jeanette. Are there any questions for Jeanette? Seeing none, at this time I'd ask the board for a motion to approve the resolution on the review of the proposed modified 2022-2025 district fiscal plan, noting that the review, as Jeanette has said, is provisional based on the Board of Education's actions today and in the near future. Additionally, in the event of the Board of Education passing the district superintendent's proposal to increase exempt personnel raises that the district submit to the BFSA the funding plan for the related costs increase within 10 days. May I have a motion to approve the resolution?
Within 10 days, just to refresh my memory, within 10 days of approval of the senior team's compensation changes, that is the 10-day expectation. That's when we're expecting them, asking them to submit a revised, modified plan, right?
That was the intent of this. Based on the superintendent's comments earlier, it doesn't look like the board will be approving that tonight.
Right.
So we'll be working with Jeff to get that information before, presumably we'll end up getting that before it goes to Board of Ed vote.
Well, again, does that mean we want to keep that in our resolution or not?
I would recommend keeping it in the resolution because it is an item that's before the Board of Education that we're aware of, and it would impact the financial plan that you're acting on today if they end up approving it.
Good. I agree with you. We're keeping the we're keeping the 10-day window open, which will close. Got it. Thank you.
So is there a motion to approve the resolution?
As moved.
Okay. Second?
Second it.
We can have a discussion. Is there any other discussion on the resolution? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, the resolution passes. Jeff, hey, you've done yeoman's work. Thank you for staying through all of this. We really appreciate it. We'll now move on to our final district item, which is the presentation by district leadership on the spending plan and the federal stimulus award. I know you've said and you've done an awful lot of that. So is there anything else you'd like to add?
I don't have anything else to add at this time. If you have any questions, I can certainly try to answer them or take them back to folks that can.
I mean, one question I guess I have is that this is, as you've said, a fluid document in trying to spend all of the funding. So are you looking over the next year to try to move more money into the indirects to take over operating funding? And how do you think the whole pandemic issue with federal funding, the foundation aid changes, are you looking to match those with these the last two big contracts? So should we expect you to be able to fund, and I'm not asking you to tell me your labor strategy or anything else, but is the idea that you'll have enough money to fund these two last contracts from the additional aid going forward?
Yeah, a couple things. One thing to clarify first on the indirect cost. It's a charge to the grant. It's a prescribed rate based on certain eligible spending. So it is what it is. There is no change. Like we can't maximize that or increase that beyond what we legally can.
Right.
So that those numbers will be what they'll be. We're conservatively putting them in the general fund budget just to kind of show it that way. But they'll calculate themselves out throughout the next 3 years. We're expecting, and it's in the 4-year financial plan. And when the state legislation was passed last year, the budget, it included a 3-year full phase-in of foundation aid. So that full phase-in of foundation aid is more than we've ever really dreamed of asking the state for. We've asked for 50 million, so it's roughly about $100 million is what that full phase-in of foundation aid will do. It is, it really, in my opinion, kind of puts us on a structural balance in our general fund budget, because that is separate and apart from all this federal aid. The federal aid is one thing, foundation aid is something else. We can, over the next couple of years, we can manage between the two, certainly. I'm confident that whatever contracts that we bring forward related to teachers, administrators, that we'll be able to confidently, account for those in our plan. And obviously, those are our two biggest. So those would have an impact on the plan. But we're confident based on what we know now of our budget and what the projections of state aid are at this time, that we'll be able to address those, just like we've addressed these other smaller contracts.
Right. I wasn't saying that I thought we could manipulate indirect aid, for the record, but depending on what categories we use in that, we would have gotten different amounts of indirect aid. So I'm just hoping that, we looked at that as part of the process and all of this.
No, and actually you're right. So if we put more staff in there, the indirect would probably increase, where if we put more contractual items, the indirect would decrease. We're not, we're trying to do whatever is best for the plan, and indirect will be what it will be. So that's kind of how we're dealing with it.
So we have the charter schools and that whole issue, which may or may not get resolved in the next year or two. Are we looking, though, with COVID then, in the needs of the students that we sort of talked about, whether it's remediation for getting people back or something like that, as I'm assuming part of those dollar amounts are to try to bring people back up to class level so that they can proceed on. Are we looking, is there a separate fund in all of that? And how long do you expect to do that, for the next 2 years with just the federal aid, or are we putting together a more permanent program?
So any of the supplemental, to bring students back up to grade level, we're looking at summer, after school, and then Saturdays. After school has been a little difficult this year because of the transportation issues. Right. We're going to have to look at other strategies and things like that for that. Saturdays are a little bit different because that tends to be more, parents bring their kids to the school. We don't transport. So those are things that we'll do as long as they're needed. I mean, it's still uncertain at this point where all the remediation is even needed. From kind of what you hear a lot, it's social emotional is where a lot of things are. That data is still being gathered, but the intent of the federal funding was really to supplement and to do more of things that are supposed to help you kind of right away. So that's why the plan is largely we're front loading it more. We're trying to do more in the early years and the later years, and trying to address where we can all of the outside of the school year, because there's only so much you can fit into the school day. So if you want to do more, you've got to hit summer, after school and Saturdays.
Just for the record, as somebody who's getting your students, and students from all over the state, so I don't want to pick on you at all, but math and English would be really important things. It's not just social and emotional, as we've been working with the poor kids. I mean, and they've gone through an awful lot. I mean, quite frankly, I think the social and emotional are very important parts to all of this. And just the exhaustion of the students is amazing. As my students are trying to finish up a final, I think they're about ready to go to sleep as we work on all of that. So I appreciate that. I guess I'm wondering, I think that this is going to be a much longer issue than 1 or 2 years when the money runs out for a lot of these students. And so I applaud any work you can do to try to spread the money out to make sure we continue these programs. Because the other issue that we're seeing now is the huge dropout rate for African-American men. And I'm just wondering whether or not we have a program that we're going to be working particularly with everything that's happened to try to target them. And I would be interested personally in helping you work with any of that if you're talking about any of those things, because I think it's critical at this point, particularly for the city's future financial well-being.
Yeah, and I'm not an expert on a lot of the various programs because it does get very granular down to individual curriculum areas and so forth. Two of the things that, we're pretty excited about are like those single gender schools. We've had some teams go to New York City to study some of what they've done, where these schools that were developed there, both, boys and girls school are having numbers, with primarily minority students that are really off the charts compared to, typical schools. And whether exactly how that comes to be, I think that's what they're looking at right now to try and bring schools like that to try and serve a population that might be a good fit for. But that's just one, or really two different things. There's certainly more than that.
Okay, great. Sorry for eating up everybody's time, but are there any other questions or issues or discussion points? I just saw someone come on with a phone number 2852. Can you identify yourself?
Yeah, it's Andy. I had to jump off.
Hi,
here.
Andy. Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have any questions for Jeff at this point, or any statements?
Well, I had to jump off, so I've been gone for about 10 minutes, so I didn't catch the last part of the discussion, and I got disconnected.
Oh, I apologize for that.
Okay, what were you guys talking about?
We're finally talking about the district's financial plan and some of the issues.
Oh, no, I'm good with that.
Okay.
No, I didn't know if you guys were bringing up the management salaries.
Well, we did bring up that. Where did you miss that? We passed the resolution that was sent to you earlier today. Were you here for Superintendent Cash's discussion of that?
Yes, I was.
Okay. Would you like to comment on any of that? That would be a good.
I was just curious as to whether or not we've seen where the analysis was generated from to justify the salary increases. You mentioned the big five, but did they provide us with that analysis?
Jeanette?
We, the quick answer is no. So we're aware that this is moving to the board tonight, and then we'll be working with Jeff to kind of better understand it. But the quick answer on that is no, not yet.
Okay, because I thought in a previous discussion, we just talked about the comparables with New York City, and I didn't know if that was appropriate or not. So we're going to have further discussion on it on our own?
I believe so, yes.
There is, as part of the resolution.
I really don't have anything. Well, I would vote no on the resolution.
Well,
Does that
it's
have any
already,
consequence?
no,
Yeah, I tried voting no, and apparently no one heard me.
Okay,
And then
I'm
I was
sorry about that.
affected. No problem, no problem.
Okay.
No,
Jeff,
I have nothing else for Jeff.
Jeff?
Oh, I was just, in the district's board resolution, the superintendent's resolution for those raises, the comparables were, I believe, listed at the end of that resolution. I think there was a comparison to the big five districts, and then another one that compared it to them plus the high and low Erie County. So that's like a one-page document that was in there.
Okay, those were references, right? But Jeff, did he provide the analysis, the breakdown?
No, that's what I've seen is what's in there.
Okay.
Okay. So in other words, we haven't seen any really numbers of all the different school districts that he was referring to.
Not to my knowledge, so.
Okay.
Jeanette?
No, we have not.
Okay. Jeff, thank you for all of this. If you have to go, we understand that. I think that ends the school board's portion of our meeting. You're more than happy to stay if you want and listen to the issues with the city of Buffalo. But we also understand you've got meetings tonight and other things to go to. So we appreciate your time.
Okay, thank you. And thanks for the work that you all do, please.
Great. Okay, let's move now to the city items. The first city item for review is the audited financial statements for the city of Buffalo for the year ending June 30th, 2021, as submitted by the city controller on November 15th, 2021. Bryce, can you give us the presentation, please?
All right, good afternoon. Hopefully everybody can see my screen at this time. Is the comparison of the adopted, final, and actual for fiscal year ending June 30th, 21. As a reminder, the budget was adopted balanced with total revenues and expenditures of $519.6 million. Whereas year-end expenditures totaled $517.7 million, excluding encumbrances totaling $10.8 million. Actual revenues totaled $532.5 million in year, leading to a year-end surplus of $14.8 million. Increasing total general fund balance from $89.5 million to $104.3 million. And as just a reference, included in the $104.3 million is $10.8 million for encumbrances. The next slide here compares the last two fiscal years' revenues and other financing sources. Year to year, change was $48.9 million. Revenues increased $73.9 million year to year, whereas other financing sources decreased by $25 million. And that $25 million decrease is attributed to the deficiency notes that were issued in June of 2020 at the end of the fiscal year there. So the year-end total revenue for the city was $532.5 million. The revenue, the significant variances are as follows. Operating revenues increased by $73.9 million, primarily through the intergovernmental revenue, which increased by $87.6 million. $40 million of that was attributed to the American Recovery Plan Act funds. $39.4 million was attributed to the New York State aid. As you may remember, prior year, fiscal year 20, the state reduced the June payment. So they delayed the state aid payment in fiscal year 2020 and then made the city whole in the following fiscal year 2021. There was an increase in sales tax collections of $11.2 million. And then a net decrease of $3 million in all other intergovernmental funds. To offset the increase in intergovernmental revenues, miscellaneous revenue decreased by $10 million. $5.7 million of that was attributed to the sale of land and buildings. Miscellaneous other decreased by $5.2 million. All other large categorical revenues sources decreased on a net basis by $3.6 million. Moving down to other financing sources, as I already mentioned, the year-to-year decline was attributed to the issuance of the deficiency notes in fiscal year 2020. The chart we have here is just a historic snapshot of the property tax levy going back to fiscal year 2012, when the levy was $143.3 million. Last 2 years, it's been maintained, well, last year and the current fiscal year, it's being maintained at $147.9 million. So that's an increase of 4.6 million compared to fiscal year 12. The low point over this period was in fiscal year 2016 when the property tax rate was set at 137 million. Next slide we have here is sales tax going back to fiscal year 2011 through fiscal year 21. You'll see in fiscal year 2011, sales tax totaled 70.3 million. In the most recent year, it finished at 97.7 million, an increase of 27.4 million or 39% over that 11-year period. On a year-to-year basis, that's an increase of 11.2 million or 12.9%. So sales tax for the city and subsequently the district has responded much more robustly than initially expected going into the pandemic back in fiscal year 20. Next slide we have here is the comparison of state aid and annual state aid going back to fiscal year 2018. Big thing to take away from that, and I've already touched upon it, you'll see, well, first off, total state aid is the blue line. They'll include other sources outside of state aid, reimbursements, court facility aid, some highway dollars. And then the red line is really the total annual state aid. And those are the dollars the city can use free and clear for general operations. And as I mentioned before, it went from 161.3 down to the 141.6, but city's been made whole this previous fiscal year. So that's what that fluctuation is over that 2-year period. Moving on to expenditures, we're comparing, this chart here compares the last 2 years, fiscal year 20 and 21. Year to year expenditures increase a total of $30.6 million from 487.1 to $517.7 million. Largest component of that was under general fund expenditures, as you see, by 30.2 million, and then other financing sources really transfers out, increased by 400,000. The significant drivers to the $30.6 million increase are as follows. The departmental costs decreased by 2.2 million. Public safety year to year decreased by 1.7 million. Culture and recreational programs decreased by 1 million. And then general government support increased by 700,000. And as one would expect, it was really driven by the pandemic and what the city was able to do during that time. General charges increased by 32.5 million. And the most significant piece of that was the debt service increase by 25.8 million. This is the increase for the repayment of the deficit notes principal of $25 million and the corresponding interest of close to 800,000. So that year-to-year increase, similar to the issuance of deficit notes, the repayment was a one-time occurrence, and you won't see large fluctuations like that going forward. The other significant component to the cost or expenditure increase year to year are fringe benefits, which increased 6.7 million or almost 5%. 2.2 million of that is attributed to the increase for pension contributions, 1.8 million for increased health insurance costs. There was an increase of 1.7 million for the salary adjustment line, as well as $1 million increase for the duty disability line. And I previously mentioned the increase under transfers out for the capital debt service was 400,000. This slide here, going back to fiscal year 12 through fiscal year 21, compares actual revenues to the final budget amount. The green line or the green bar charts are the actual amounts, whereas the blue are the final budget amounts. This year, revenues exceeded the budget, actual revenues exceeded the budget amount. However, if you look over the past 5 years, the actual amount has been less than what the final budget amount has. So there was a total favorable variance of 13 million when the actual revenues were compared to the budget amount. 17 million of that under revenues, and then an unfavorable variance of 4 million for other financing sources. The favorable budget revenue, when you look budget to actuals, is as follows. 37.5 million is attributed to intergovernmental revenue. State aid came in over budget by close to $52 million. Sales tax was over budget by 26.4 million. The federal aid was under budget by 26.8 million. And that was attributed to what the city initially had budgeted versus what they needed to utilize under the ARPA revenue replacement guidelines. Casino revenue was under budget by 11 million. And then all other intergovernmental revenue was under budget on a net $3 million basis. I mean, yes, $3 million. There was a 9.8 million unfavorable variance in miscellaneous revenue. 3.3 million was attributed to sale of buildings and land. 3.2 million to the miscellaneous other revenue, and 3.3 million due to grant reimbursement to the fire department. Under fines, there was a $7 million unfavorable variance, 4.4 million unfavorable variance for parking fines, 2 million unfavorable variance for traffic violation fines, and 600,000 unfavorable variance for all other fines. Continuing on to service charges, total unfavorable variance of 2.8 million, 1.6 million that is attributed to parking meter fees, 400,000 for rental registration fees. There's a unfavorable variance of 900,000 in investment interest. And then under licenses and permits, there's an unfavorable variance of 900,000 as well, consisting of 500,000 for the EMS franchise fee, 200,000 for building permits, and all other licenses and permits were in net unfavorable 200,000 compared to the final budget amount. And then under other financing sources, there was an unfavorable variance of $4 million, and that's directly related to the transfer from the Park Enterprise Fund, which was unfavorable by $4 million. The next slide we have here is the expenditure historical chart comparing final budget amounts to actual amounts between fiscal year 12 and fiscal year 21. You can see in the previous 9 years that actual expenditures, are below the final budget amounts, except in the most recent fiscal year 21, where there was an unfavorable variance of 2.1 million. In this chart, red indicates actual budget, whereas the light blue is the final budget amount. In fiscal year 2020-21, there was an unfavorable variance for budget appropriations of 2.2 million. 25.8 million unfavorable variance debt service for the repayment of the deficit notes and corresponding interest costs. There was a 5.5 million unfavorable variance in other judgments and claims. Offset those unfavorable variances, there was a 13.6 million favorable variance in fringe benefits, including 10.7 million on combined basis for health insurance, 2.6 million favorable variance on a combined basis for pension payments. Workers' compensation was favorable by 900,000. And then there was a unfavorable variance of $1 million in regards to the salary adjustment line. Departmentally, there was a $600,000 unfavorable variance in the fire department due to overtime, 2.3 million favorable variance in police department due to vacancies, and then a total 13.8 million favorable variance in all their departments due to vacancies and a decrease in expenditures for supplies and services. The next slide we have here is a year-to-year comparison of the fund balance summary by major categories. We did include June 30, 2019, just as a reference on the far side. Year to year, fund balance did increase by 14.8 million. Significant areas of increase include unassigned at 8.2 million, assigned at 4.1 million, and committed at 2.6 million. In regards to the non-spendable restricted fund balance, that was relatively flat year to year at 38.7 million, with changes occurring in the what was due from the refuse fund that has decreased by 900,000, going from 13.3 down to 12.4 million. And this decrease is offset by an increase in capital outlay by 1.2 million year to year. The committed fund balance is subject to a purpose constraint imposed by Common Council. It's also, it's the Emergency Stabilization Fund, the rainy day fund, and it's currently at $40.7 million. Moving on to assigned, that's an increase of $4.1 million. 2.2 of that is attributed to encumbrances, and then 1.9 million to judgments and claims. Apologize, this is a very busy slide. It's due to all the data points that we have. What we're looking at is the unrestricted and total fund balance between fiscal year 2003 through fiscal year 21. Back in 2003, the low point, unrestricted fund balance is 26.7 million, and total fund balance was 30 million. And over the last almost 20 years now, you can see how it's fluctuated to a high of 165.8 million in fiscal year 13 for total fund balance, down to the 104.3 million that we're currently at fiscal year end 2021. This slide is just a summary on the Opeb, going back to fiscal year 2006 through fiscal year 21. You'll see that in fiscal year 2006, Opeb totaled 946 million and has increased by approximately 440 million to $1,383 million as of July 1, 21, and that's actuarial valuation. Since the high point in fiscal year 2010, when it was 1,637 million, there's been a 15.5% decrease in Opeb. This slide shows the annual operating income loss for the solid waste and recycling fund. This ties back to when we're talking about the non-spendable funds and what the general fund hasn't incurred on a restricted basis for the solid waste and recycling fund. As you can see, the last 3 years, they've shown a positive income total of roughly $10.8 million total over the last 3 years. And this impacts the long-term receivable by the general fund. As you can see, it was as high as $19.5 million several years ago in fiscal year 18 and is currently down to $12.4 million. So as long as the fund maintains operating with a surplus, they will continue to pay down this long-term receivable to the general fund. No, I've gone through that presentation rather quickly. Were there any questions from any of the directors?
Bryce, would you comment on casino revenue, which pre-COVID was something that troubled us and troubled the city a lot. And I think it showed an 11 million shortfall in the audited year end.
Correct. The city has maintained budgeting for the casino revenue. This has been an ongoing issue, as in the Seneca Gaming organization has not made the payment to New York State. It's currently working through a process. Just a quick update on that. The last I saw was that the Office of the Interior was looking at this to determine if the extension of the gaming compact was legal.
Right.
So that was as end of September, I believe. So there's a current pause. So going back in the spring, arbitration and the courts all found in favor of the state and said, okay, you need to commence making these payments. But right now it's on pause once again in regards to that. So there's approximately, I believe, about $31 million in outstanding casino revenue due to the city. And then once again, the city did include it in this year's budget and financial plan. But they are following what the state did.
Sure.
New York State did budget that amount in their, not the same amount, but a amount in their budget and financial plan.
Okay. And I want to keep this question small, so that when there is a return to normal on casino revenue, the city will get an injection of between 30 and 40 million, right?
That is correct.
Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, why don't we move to the next item, a review of the city's first quarter report. The BFSA report on this item is provided under tab 5 of your board book, and the city's submission, including all 4-quarter gap reports, were submitted with the books. Bryce, can you continue your review? Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. At the end of the first quarter, September 30th, 21, the city is projecting a favorable variance, year-end variance of $8 million. Just as a refresher, the adopted budget amount was $534.6 million this year. And currently, the projection is favorable $700,000 in revenue, and then expenditures will be favorable by $7.3 million. So expenditures are estimated to go from 534.6 down to 527.2 million. Slide we have here is comparing the adopted budget revenue sources to the first quarter year-end amounts. Most category, there's one significant favorable variance, whereas on a net basis, all the other revenue categories have an unfavorable year-end variance of $5 million. The positive year-end variance of $5.8 million is in intergovernmental revenues and is really attributed to the sales tax increase. And right as of end of first quarter, there is no expected variance for transfers in. 5.8 million projected favorable budget variance in intergovernmental, 5.6 million is.
Bryce, I think Director Sanfilippo had a question.
Oh, absolutely.
Bryce, what is the 7.3 million attributable to in the expenditure savings?
That'll be my next slide.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I'm just working off your notes.
Yeah, we're almost. I'll be right there. I'll be there momentarily. But just in regards to the revenue, as I said, intergovernmental is being driven by favorable variance in sales tax of 5.6. Under miscellaneous revenue, it's unfavorable by 3.8 million, and that's in regards to the postponement of the in-rem foreclosure sales. Moving on to licenses and permits, year end is projected to be under budget by 600,000. $500,000 of that's attributed to the expired franchise agreement for ambulance and EMS services. Other revenues are net unfavorable by $500,000, $400,000 attributed to service charges, and fines $100,000. This slide here is just a snapshot as a reminder of the intergovernmental revenues, comparing fiscal year 21 and fiscal year 22. Fiscal year 21, the adopted budget amount was $285.3 million, whereas year-end actuals were $323.7 million. The adopted budget amount of intergovernmental this year is $314.2 million, with a current year-end projection of $320 million. And in here, you'll see that we broke down state aim. You see the major swing from last year from going from budget amount 129 up to 181 million. This year it's held flat at 161.3 million. Sales tax year-end projection is favorable by that 5.5 million I mentioned earlier. Casino revenue is budgeted at 11 million. The federal ARPA funds is budgeted at 50.4 million. Moving on to the expenditures, we're currently looking at a favorable 7.3 million at year end. 3 million of that is attributed to departmental costs, primary personnel, services, supplies, whereas 4.4 million is attributed to general charges, comprising primarily of fringe benefits, personal service costs, and utilities. Breaking that 7.3 million down as follows. So the $3 million favorable variance in departmental expenditures is largely due to vacancies. 1.1, there is a 1.1 million unfavorable projection for the fire department. Looks like due to overtime, the fire department will exceed budget. The remaining departments are projected to have favorable budget variance of 4.1 million. And that includes a favorable variance of 1.6 million in public works, 500,000 in admin and finance, 400,000 in human resources, and the remaining departments make up a net 1.6 million favorable year-end variance. The other part of this is the general charges. So currently there is a 4.4 million favorable variance in general charges. 3.2 million of that is in fringe benefits and personnel services. So year-end projection favorable variance of 2.2 million for health insurance, 800,000 for workers' comp, offset by a unfavorable $200,000 for duty disability salaries. The city is also projecting a favorable variance of 600,000 year-end for utilities. And then there's a 300,000 favorable variance in the other category. Director Sanfilippo, did that address your question?
Yes, it did. All I needed to do was turn the page.
Good to hear. Transfers out, currently there is no projected variance there. From a staffing perspective I'm sorry?
Go ahead, Bryce.
Okay. From a staffing perspective, the adopted budget included 2,697 positions. At the end of the first quarter, there was 2,382 filled, leading to a vacancy rate of 315, or close to 12% of the budgeted workforce. Just for comparison's sake, compared to last year, at the end of the first quarter, there was 240 vacancies, or a 9% vacancy rate. So there's been an increase of 75 vacancies year to year through the first quarter.
Bryce,
Yes.
I see that traditionally we've had overtime issues with the police. And I was assuming that given all of the hard work to fill those police lines, that was the reason why we weren't using overtime, or there was no negative variance there. Am I missing something? Because it looks like we have the same number of vacancies as we have. Is it just the mix of the police force or some other reason that we don't seem to see the overtime costs that we have in the past?
There's a couple of factors on that. On a net basis, there's actually more vacancies in the police department, even though they brought in a new class that started in July. But that takes the class almost, 6 months in the academy, another several months working with a senior officer. So it'll be a while before those officers are deployed on their own. The administration's made some changes within the department. The previous year, events are just starting to gear up again. So some of the overtime that would have been associated with working with traffic or some of these large community events have not been needed. So that's one area they've been able to control, not necessarily control overtime, but the need was not there. Whereas on the fire department side, even though there's been an increase in hires, they still have retirements going at a pretty quick pace. And so you're starting to see that. And then with the fire department also being in the close proximity of each other on a 24-hour shift, if you have an individual that tests positive for COVID, that basically could impact that shift and that specific firehouse.
Well, thank you. And for any reason, Donna, thank you for doing this. It looks like you've done a really good job. So I want to just congratulate you on that, because I know it's been hard.
Oh, it's the departments that work at it, so they deserve the credit on this.
Donna, in that regard, do I recall your voice or the mayor's voice telling us that there was, how should I put it, an informal hiring freeze? And do I recall that correctly? And is that what accounts for a 12% vacancy percentage?
We did have one in the prior year. We are not under that currently.
Okay.
I think the vacancies right now are the police and fire. We're having new classes come January in both of those. And some of the departments have just been slow to hire. We've also had, I think we've had a little more retirements than normal in the regular white collar and blue collar employees. So once again, you have to replace them, and it takes sometimes a little bit of time to replace the employees.
Right. Yes.
But there is not a freeze at this time.
Okay, thank you.
All right. The Bfsa recommends the city continue to monitor the financial impact from the COVID-19 pandemic and subsequent recovery. 3 months through the fiscal year, it's still early, and subsequent events could have a significant impact on the city's operations. City's currently projecting a year-end surplus of $8 million. This projection includes $50.4 million in the ARPA funds and $11 million from the tribal state compact casino revenue will be received by year-end. Now, if the non-receipt of the casino revenue occurs, the revenue revises the projected surplus to a deficit of $3 million at year-end. And that brings us to the end of the first quarter.
Hey, are there any questions? Executive Director Robe, do you have any statements you want to put at this point?
Not on the first quarter. I think Bryce really covered all of our findings on it. There's always just the overarching consideration that it's really early in the year, and things that could happen that are not unexpected could occur and could have very different results than what were included in the projections that we have.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So I think the next item is the mayor's recommended 2022 capital budget and the related 2022-2026 5-year capital improvement program. This is under tab 5 in your book. Bryce, do you want to continue?
Will do. The following presentation will focus on the capital budget as it was submitted to the Common Council on November 1st by the administration. As an update, the council has reviewed and adopted the capital budget yesterday, December 14th, with changes. And those changes really fall under the infrastructure line. And each district will be receiving $400,000. But we'll get into that in a little bit. So this first slide really shows that the 2022 recommended capital plan totals $34 million and includes $25 million in projects to be sold and $9 million in projects to be authorized but unissued. City will be investing in projects across the city, including engineering, investments in the fire and police department, city-owned buildings, cultural organizations, as well as the parks. The $25 million that's being requested to be financed can be broken out on this pie chart, with the most significant piece being city buildings at $7.3 million or 29%, followed by infrastructure at $5.5 million or 22%. The changes made by the council fall under the infrastructure piece, as each district will be receiving $400,000 in infrastructure for their district specific projects. So that's approximately $3.6 million out of the $5.5 that's going into the district, and infrastructure costs are 22% total. Parks constitute $4.3 million of the borrowing, or 17%. Vehicles and safety equipment, $4.6 million, 18%. Investment in economic development and culturals, almost $2 million. And then the demolitions and tree management total $1.4 million, or 6%. As I said previously, the mayor's 2022 request includes $25 million in citywide projects, $9 million to be authorized but unissued, for a total of $34 million. The mayor has requested $25 million to be borrowed. The comptroller's limit for financing in the current year is $25 million, so there's no variance between the two. Of the mayor's request, $19.3 million is for new borrowing, whereas $5.7 million is from previously authorized and unissued. So that's how we get to that $25 million total. Total amount.
Bryce, do we have any idea as to how many bonds have been issued, but our unspent proceeds?
I do have a slide on that. I'll be to that in probably 3 slides if you can hold on to any questions.
Okay, fine. Thanks.
Thank you. So after this proposed sale of the $25 million that includes $5.7 million previously authorized but unissued, the total amount remaining of authorized but unissued projects would be $14.7 million prior to this sale. After the sale, it's estimated to be $18.7 million. And in addition to the $18.7 million, there remains $4.1 million in budgeted and unauthorized projects. This is a historical slide going back to 2011. The red bars represent the city's bonding. The blue represents when the city borrowed for the district, and the green are years that or times a ban has been issued. The city has not borrowed on behalf of the district going back to fiscal year 2012. And as you can see, it's been relatively consistent. City's total borrowing in fiscal year 2011 was $27.3 million. This year's proposal is $25 million. Last year was higher, but this all goes back to the impact of the pandemic. So there was a combination of prior authorizations when they moved forward with a ban. So there were some nuances in regards to fiscal year 21, but as you can see, the proposed or the adopted plan was or is $25 million this year. And this is the slide that Director Sanfilippo was just asking about, going back to 2015 through fiscal year 2021. It's the capital borrowing proceeds remaining by issuance as of November 1st. Total unspent remaining proceeds is $22.8 million. And as you can see, the significant bulk of that is in the 3 most recent years. 13.8 million, over half of it attributed to fiscal year 21, and then 1.8 in 2020, and then 2.9 million in regards to the 2019 ban. And that is a increase of approximately $500,000 compared to the same time last year in regards to unspent bond proceeds.
Director Sanfilippo, did that answer your question?
Yeah, do we know what the percentage is though from the debt issuance? In other words, you gave me numbers, but what percentage is that of unspent bond proceeds? If you can, not that you need to calculate it now. I was just curious as to how much is gone unspent up to this point from the debt that's been issued.
I'm just trying to see if I had it in my notes.
It's no big deal. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, I can get that for you.
Yeah, no, I just want to make.
Actually,
I just want to make sure. I just want to make sure that, you know, with the vacancy levels and especially in Public Works Department, you know, whether they're being handcuffed or hamstrung on their ability to issue these contracts to get these projects built.
Yeah, and I do have that information. So between fiscal year 2015 and 21, a total, this includes bonds and bans, a total of 167.8 million was issued. The outstanding 22.8 million represents 13.6 million of those total proceeds sold.
So about 9%.
14%. Yep.
That was a little.
Well, I still think that's pretty favorable that they are spending these proceeds, because there's no investment income coming in that is of any significance due to the rates being what they are. At one time, we were able to invest the money, and Donna remembers all this. You know, we were borrowing at certain rates, but we were earning at higher rates on those bond proceeds, but to pay debt service, which was always a positive. But now, since those investable funds, you know, the earnings rates aren't as attractive, I just want to make sure that we're still being able to build the projects without any sort of negative arbitrage. Anyways, that's all. Thanks, though, Bryce. I'm good.
Andy, we are using a lot of outside contractors now and consultants, kind of what you said with people retiring and experienced people retiring. So we've reached out and have started using some consultants.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah. Well, you know, and obviously that we have a certain cap on the annual size of the borrowings to make sure that we're not overextending ourselves, like issuing debt on projects that won't be built anytime soon. But, you know, Donna, you guys are doing a good job under some very difficult circumstances. So let me applaud you for that.
Well, the OS Department of Office of Strategic Planning and Public Works and, you know, everybody included, they put together a 5-year plan. So that's being finalized right now of all the different projects and the different sources of funding for these projects. So once that's completed, we can share that with you too.
Okay, sounds good.
All right. So once again, in the 2022 proposed borrowing, there are no projects included for the district. District's currently using savings from the JSCB debt refundings, and they have approximately $18 million remaining. Bonding for ongoing general operations included $900,000 for tree removal and planting, $500,000 for citywide demolitions, Now, this does utilize limited bonding capacity. So the total of those two is 1.4 million. Included in the proposed 2022 borrowing is 5.7% total proposed capital borrowing. And over the 5-year capital improvement outside of fiscal year 22, there's only $1 million included at this time. Recognition of fiscal pressures such as projects would place a fund. We recognize that if these projects were included in the general fund, they would place additional pressures on a pay-as-you-go basis, but is what it is. The city has received an unprecedented amount of federal dollars. Currently, there's a draft plan that is earmarked $141 million in various capital investments. This chart here is a snapshot of those investments over the next 4 years. And based on actions taken yesterday by the Common Council, it will be adjusted. But projects range from investments in the Buffalo Sewer Authority to the Buffalo Water Authority, citywide community centers, investments in culturals, housing, libraries, parks, and roadway projects. So as I said, it's approximately 141 million, and I believe with the council's actions, they'll increase it to almost 144 million. And at that point, I will hand it over to Executive Director Rowe.
Thank you. So we have 3 main recommendations, and they're not really different from what we've said before. The first recommendation relates to the planning of projects in terms of, now that they're approved and they're authorized, when will they be financed? How will the projects kick off? And the amount authorized but not issued, it increases 21% over last year. The new amount is 18.7 million. Of that 18.7, a portion of it, Bryce noted 7.8 million, is included over the following 4 years of the capital plan. So the difference, it's unclear when or how these projects will be financed or funded, at least within the 5-year capital plan. And what we're recommending is that get mapped out probably longer than the 5-year financial plan. So it's clear in terms of when the financing for those projects will happen. Just to map that out, to understand, especially in terms of the capacity limitations that are placed by the debt cap. I think it would assist in the capital planning process. The second item is recognizing, again, the limited capacity to borrow under the cap. We continue to advise the city to eliminate ongoing operating expenses gradually from the capital borrowing process. And finally, the final recommendation is that the city, of course, was awarded substantial funding for infrastructure projects through the ARPA award. The city's spending plan for this funding has not yet been solidified, and the city administration has indicated that this will occur in January. In recognition of the ongoing development of this spending and recovery plan, we recommend that the capital planning process be carefully conducted in consideration of the additional funding that's available to the city, in order to identify areas where capacity can be enhanced and further allowing the city to expand its capital investments in these within the city limits. And that summarizes my comments. So I will open the floor to any questions at this time.
Well, here's a comment. I don't think it's a question. We see $50 million of rescue money. I know that's not the right word, but of federal money, 50 million for water and sewer. And I recall clearly the county executive personally telling us that that was one of the gosh darn problems, is that those infrastructure needs could not be addressed because because of the developmental timeline for projects like that. And so that means that the 50 million earmarked for water and sewer is either unrealistic or it may be unrealistic, which means it doesn't belong in there. I'm just a little puzzled, and I don't expect any of my colleagues to give me a hard answer, but I'm puzzled, and it's an appropriate category. But I remember Mr. Poloncarz telling us, no way, you can't do those big damn things. So much my puzzlement.
Thank you.
I don't have an answer, so I'll let it go.
Okay.
On that.
But put it this way, do you recall that? I mean, that was...
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. No, it's an obvious issue. The question is, I don't know what the answer is.
Okay. All right.
To that.
If I could just interject on that, Director Jurasek. Part of what County Executive Poloncarz was talking about was also the larger treatment plants and the process of going through a seeker and getting all that up and running. I think some of the projects the city is looking at doing may involve things that they've already had in the pipe and we're looking at doing, may be related more to water line replacements, sewer lines, and not necessarily a full treatment plant.
Got you.
So these might be projects that they were considering. This is just my understanding of the process. Projects that they were looking at borrowing for in the near future anyways, on an annual basis.
I understand. Thank you.
That's exactly what they are. Some of them are lead lines where they've identified high lead. So where they go from the main to the home and they'll replace all the lead lines. That's a project they've been doing for a couple of years now. So that'll definitely be used up. And then the sewer lines was a project that they had already outlined and started, has consultants already working on it and have priced it out already. So those will be gone.
Got you. And Bryce has to work on his puns because he said all of these sewer and water things were in the pipeline.
Yeah.
There we go.
Thank you.
Well, folks, thanks for everybody hanging in. We're now over 3 hours into all of this, and I appreciate it. We only have 2 more quick items to go. The first one is we have on our agenda the Buffalo Urban Renewal Agency, and they're sending us their staff report on the first quarter. The BFSA analysis of that item is included under tab 6 in our books, and I request a motion to receive and file the report as submitted to us. Is there a motion?
I'll move.
Okay, second?
Seconded.
Thank you. Are there any questions or discussion?
On any item or on?
Just on this motion to receive and file. Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
It passes. Thank you, Andy. The last item on our agenda is that we have the first quarter report from the Buffalo Municipal Housing Authority. This is under the analysis is under tab 7 in your books, and I request a motion to receive and file the report as submitted. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second?
So moved.
Okay, thank you. Any discussion? Seeing none.
I just have one quick.
Yes.
I'm sorry. I just have one quick question. You know, looking at a lot of these projects, I don't even know how to ask the question, but what is our municipal housing authority's relationship with the New York State Department of Homes and Community Renewal? Are they funding any public projects that would fall under their jurisdiction that we're aware of?
Donna, that's probably a question for you. I don't think they are, but I'm not.
I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, I'm
I
not.
can get
100
it, but I don't know the answer to it.
Okay.
No, I'm thinking out loud because I serve on the Municipal Bond Bank Agency, and it's like the umbrella organization for a lot of these boards is Division of Homes and Community Renewal. And I know they're running a lot of capital projects or new home projects in the various municipalities and jurisdictions around the state. And I didn't know if they're in conjunction with our housing authority. That's all. Because I know that project on Niagara Street, Lower Niagara, that's a homes and community renewal project. But I wouldn't think then that that's under the auspices of the MHA.
No,
And I didn't
that's
know if
under
there was-
Bura, under the home funding, some monies from home.
Oh, it is? Okay.
Yes.
All right. Yeah, that was just a general question, and like I said, because I witness all these different projects around the state, and I didn't know if they fall under the category of our housing authority.
Thanks, Andy. That's a good question. Maybe, Jeanette, we can look more into some of the other state funding and things and work with Andy to make sure the city is getting as much money as they can for these projects.
Absolutely.
Well,
That's
the
what
city is,
I could
Bura
tell you.
would be using that money. Now, I
Yeah.
thought you asked through the housing, the BMHA.
No,
The city
no,
gets
I
the
understand.
funding.
I mean,
We do
well,
in conjunction with that.
I'm assuming that the BMHA, they have several public housing projects, and the New York State Department of Homes and Community Renewal, I would think that the BMHA would fall under maybe their umbrella as far as generating financing for other public housing projects. I mean, that's probably a question I should ask them, obviously.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's a good
Okay.
question, Andy, and I think why don't we work on it with you to figure out what we can do? So I appreciate that.
It actually was more of a question or an observation than actually, having to, dig down deep into it. I could always use other resources, but I'm just curious, because, you want to make sure that we have all the housing ability for all our low to middle income residents, and that's all.
No, that's a good point, Andy. So we have a motion to file and receive the BMHA report. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right.
Opposed?
Aye.
It passes. That concludes our business portion of our meeting. And now I'm going to open up the floor to anyone from the public. Yes?
I'm sorry. Only in reflection on the day's discussions has this become clear to me. We, Andy, reflecting our joint thinking, asked about the data used, the comparative indexes to justify the superintendent's compensation request. And Jeff was still on the line, and he couldn't answer that because the proposal didn't come from the CFO. The proposal came right from the desk of the superintendent. And someone asked, I think we asked Jeanette, did we get any comparative indexes data? And Jeanette, you said no.
I asked
right, you asked, and Jeff had to say I. Jeff had to say I. There's a loop. Well, the loops. There was a funny acoustic loop. Can we please see those? Whatever the superintendent submitted to the Board of Education. Can we request those, please? Thank you.
Yes, I will be sure to do that.
I think Director Sanfilippo's point was,
Board Member Jurasek, that's if you actually believe there is a report.
Well, then it will be good to know if there were no comparative data. So we'll see. We'll see what
Agree
Jeanette.
with the request.
We'll see what Jeanette.
I agree with the request that we have.
I think
Maybe.
Director Sanfilippo, your request actually went a little bit farther, and it was that we look at other comparables in other comparable districts that aren't just the big five. And I think that may be part of the issue as well.
Well, I agree with you, Andy and Fred, but first we have to see what what went to the Board of Education. I mean, I agree with you completely, but first we have to see what are the number arguments. The number argument.
What is the base? Yeah, what is the basis by which he's made that recommendation?
And then we can go from there. If we think it's specious, if we think they're specious, then we can act. But we have to at least see what is in the mill right now.
Yep. Are there any other comments on anything that's happened today? And again, I'll open it up to the public. If there's anyone from the public that wants to speak, that now would be the time.
Nathan, I'm just confirming there's no one in the waiting room for this meeting.
We don't have anybody in the waiting room right now.
Thank you.
Okay. So then I want to thank everybody. I think this was a productive meeting, but a very, very long meeting. And I appreciate everyone putting in the effort and the time and making time for us to work on all of these things. I think we obviously have issues with the school district that are going to be ongoing. I'm hopeful, given some of the comments today, that we can move forward in a positive way. Thanks, everyone. I'd accept a motion to adjourn.
As moved.
So moved.
Okay.
Seconded.
All those in favor, thank you. And thanks for coming today, guys. I appreciate it.
Everybody.